So our speaker today is a familiar face with everyone. Kirt himself has put out how many now? 5 books? 8 books. 8 books, sorry. In different genres, including the revising fiction book, which has been in one of the bestsellers, I think, in this group anyway, because he's got so much great information in it. And he's teaching that for us later on this year. His classes start next week. That's right, next week. Oh, gee, many Christmas. It's this month now. Yeah, we had all those booms. Yeah, after the booms. Yeah, Kirt's going to be doing it. He gets, that's his introduction, is lots and lots of fireworks. So, and he'll make the fireworks happen in your stories. He's going to give you a little intro as to what's going on with his class. If you decide to participate with that, you will get some really personal, in-depth opinions as to how to tweak, improve, and make it pop. So without further ado, Kirt Hickman.
All right, good morning. So today I'm going to talk about how to bring your settings to life. And this is just one of a dozen or more broad topics that I cover in my class. So it's going to be kind of a preview of the 8-week course coming up. And as is my custom, I'm going to start with sort of the broad topics and then work my way down into more and more narrow focus until we get to the final, minutiae of setting descriptions. So we're going to start with, building your world as a whole. So if you're writing science fiction, or you're writing, something takes place, making up your own future, or writing fantasies, something like Middle Earth or Narnia, you're going to just be making stuff up. If you're writing in another time period, like a historical novel, if you're writing in another setting, another country, another culture, I write on other planets in our solar system, real environments, real settings, real worlds, you're going to be relying primarily on research. You have to make sure you do enough research to get the details right. If you don't, your readers are going to catch you on it. So, but even if you're writing, say, a mystery novel that takes place in present-day Albuquerque, New Mexico, you may not need to do a lot of research. You may not need to make a lot of stuff up, but your world exists only to the extent that you present it on the page for your reader. And so as you present your novel or your story that takes place in present-day Albuquerque, New Mexico, you need to make sure that you present it with some depth, with some character, so it doesn't come across just as a like a set of facades, like you might find on a movie set or something like that. So keep that in mind as you consider how much you present of your setting and how you present that setting. And finally, whether you're making stuff up or whether you're relying on research or writing in present-day Albuquerque, New Mexico, you need to present that world as realistic and with consistency. And so consider this example. Jake Scranton shifted in the driver's seat of the stagecoach as his team's fidgeting grew more violent. Easy, girls. His partner, Buckshot Bill, gave him an uneasy glance and cocked both barrels of the shotgun cradled in his arms. The company had already lost one coach in this canyon. A tendril of dirt and pebbles trickled down the side of the sandstone cliff to their left. Jake undid the clasp on his holster. He scanned the ridge but saw nothing more until a rifle shot echoed down the canyon. All right. So Jake undid the clasp on his holster. He scanned the ridge, but saw nothing more until a rifle shot echoed down the canyon. The bullet slammed Bill against the back of his seat. The man slumped forward and fell from the stage. His shotgun tumbled to the floorboard and fired. The blast splintered the brake lever, and Jake's startled team lunged forward. Bad Bart and a dozen of his worst men rounded the corner behind him, whooping in anticipation. The thunder of hooves drowned out the racket of the stage and his cargo. Panic coursed through Jake's blood as he fumbled the reins into his offhand and dialed the sheriff. Come on, pick up, pick up. Forget it, Buckshot said from the seat beside him. You'll never get a signal way out here. The approaching bandits rode their animals up and surrounded the coach. All drew weapons of one sort or another. Bad Bart raised his blaster. Thou art mine. Hey, how many of you thought that at least the first few paragraphs, this was off to a decent start? First few paragraphs? Hey, where did it fall apart? Was it when Jake drew his cell phone instead of a 6-shooter? Was it when Bart appeared suddenly sitting on him after having fallen from the stage? or a buckshot bill? Was it when Bart, as his animals or his horses and his guns became generic animals, or weapons of one sort or another, when he drew his blaster and started spouting Old English? Okay, this is a pretty extreme example, but the point is this story fell apart when you, as the reader, detected inconsistencies in the world that I created. Okay, as soon as you lose your credibility in the mind of the reader, they're not going to buy your story, and they're not going to read your story. So all of the so when you build your world, you have to do it with both realistically, no matter how fantastical it may be, and with consistency. And so you want to think about these things before you actually start writing. And I'm going to give you 9 sets of questions to ask yourself about your world. So you build it up and you flesh it out to a high degree before you actually start to write. So first off, number 1, what is your world like physically? Hey, what does it look like? What is the nature of the geography and the geology? What's the climate like? Can you make a map of it? If you can, do that. Number 2, what are the moral codes of the time and place? What is the society like? What are the predominant beliefs and values and even prejudices of the people who live there? Number 3, what is the economic state? Are people wealthy? Are they poor? Are they divided? What is the economy based on? Is it money? Is it barter? Is it information? So what is the currency of the realm, so to speak? Number 4, what is the domestic political structure? Does it work for the people, particularly for your main characters? Why or why not? What is the world political environment? Is it stable, or are countries at war? Who is the predominant power and why? Number 6, what is the predominant religion or religions? Are people advanced enough to know the difference between religion, philosophy, science, and magic? Number 7, if there is magic or any other paranormal element, how does it work? Who has it? Who doesn't? What are its costs and its limitations? Number 8, what is the level of scientific achievement? So what are the preferred forms of travel and communication? What's the state of medicine? Does your world have any unique technologies? And number 9, what is the day-to-day life like for your characters, and how is that different from the readers here and now? Your reader wants you to take them away from their here and now. They want to escape. And so take every opportunity that you can along the way to show how your character's world, your world that you've created, is different from the reader's here and now. Even if you write a story that takes place in, present day Albuquerque, New Mexico, and your reader lives in present day Albuquerque, New Mexico, consider that your character's world is more than just the physical place. It's also their occupation and their circumstances and the adventure that they're on. So if you're writing, for example, a police procedural, you want to make sure that you bring out those elements of your character's life that are different from the reader's here and now. Show her doing things that police do. Show her putting on her Kevlar vest, cleaning her gun, walking a perp through the police station. We should hear the sounds of sirens or the sounds of clanging cell doors, in the background from time to time. So these are the things that help bring out, the elements of your world that are different than the reader's here and now. And you should find some way to do that in every single scene. So that's the world as a whole. So now let's talk about settings. Your world, first and foremost, is a physical place, and every single scene will take place somewhere in that world. And so every single scene is going to have a setting. So we're narrowing our focus now, and we're going to create a setting for each scene. And so you want to be able to describe the setting with all 5 senses. We live in a media-driven culture. We watch a lot of movies, we watch a lot of TV, and so mostly what we get from our media is sights and sounds. And so we as authors, we sit down to write the description of our setting, and most of the time we think of sights and sounds, and so we describe the sights and sounds. But we're on the written page, we actually have the ability to bring in all of the other senses. So think about what your setting feels like. Is it hot? Is it humid? Is it cold? Is it wet? Think about the textures, the texture of the corduroy, upholstery on that old sofa, the texture of the grass, the texture of the brick wall, bring in all different kinds of things. Pain is a feeling. So make sure you bring in every element of your setting that you can through the feeling of touch. Also think about smells. Smells really bring a setting to life. Think about smells that you've experienced. A lot of times they bring back memories. So don't neglect smells. And there's everything from, new car to vomit, to feces, to perfume, to, flowers, to fresh cut grass, to rain, bring in food, the smells of food, all different kinds of smells that we can bring in, pleasant and unpleasant alike. If it's there, bring it in. And even taste. Taste is a little bit harder to bring in. A lot of times you don't have necessarily ways to do that readily, but don't neglect food. If your characters are eating food, certainly describe what that tastes like. There's the salt taste of the sea air. If they get slugged in the mouth, you might have the taste of blood. So bring in, different aspects of all five senses. So consider that. And then write down for each scene, write down a description of that setting. I like to use index cards. You could use a piece of paper, a Word document, whatever you want to use, so that when you have that description down to the extent that you can flesh it out in your mind, when you come back and write another scene in the same setting, you can be consistent. So if it's appropriate to sketch it out, make a little sketch. If it's a park, where are things at? If it's a house, what's the floor plan? Those kinds of things. So consider those as well. Think about what kind of impression you want to make on the reader with this setting. Is the place desolate? Is it arid? Is it opulent? Is it filthy? Is it dangerous? Is it scary? Is it dark? Try to make some sort of emotional impression with your setting on the reader. And then when you think about what impression you want to make, then you can go back to your description that you wrote and pull the elements of your description that will help you to make that impression. And also try to find ways for your setting to meaningfully affect the characters and the plot. And I'm not talking about having your character walk across the plush forest green carpeting, or, flump down to the beanbag chair, or lean on the granite countertop. Those are fine things to do. And those are great ways to sort of bring out elements of the setting through interactions with the character. But I'm talking here about things that are so meaningful that your story could not be the same story if it took place in another setting. I'm thinking about the letter opener on the desk that was used as a murder weapon. I'm thinking about the graffiti on the wall that has an encoded message in it that your character has to decipher in order to succeed in the mission. And my personal favorite, the window that looks out on the vast vacuum of space that becomes an immediate threat when somebody puts a bullet through it. Right? If I'm at a high-rise apartment building on Earth and somebody puts a hole through the window, no big deal. Right? You do that in space, now you've got a story that cannot take place someplace else. So think about those things as well. If your setting has changed substantially since the last time you had a scene there, you might want to write a whole new description. I'm thinking if a bomb went off in the building, a murder took place there, it's now a crime scene, those kinds of things, something that vastly changes the description of the setting, you'll want to start over with a fresh card. You might think about writing a new description if you want to make a different impression with the same setting. In my science fiction novel, Worlds Asunder, it's my first book, we have the main character is an accident investigator, works for NASA on the moon. And so I have two scenes that take place. There's a spaceship that crashes. It's called the Phoenix. And there's two scenes that take place in the cockpit of this crashed spaceship after the crash. And I want to make two completely different impressions with that same setting. And so the way I do that is the first scene is with inside the cockpit, inside the spaceship at the crash site. And so you've got the moon, you've got all the debris around, you've got everything littered all over the cockpit that, went out of place when it hit the ground. And then the second scene in the same setting is when this whole thing has been picked up and it has been moved back to a hangar bay at the base, and they've laid everything out the way they found it at the scene so they can look at it in that context, and they're going to do a reenactment of what happened and try to figure out what happened from things like the black box and communications transcripts and flight data from the navigation and those kinds of things. And so the first scene, I want it to have a sort of dark and scary feel because they're out at the crash site. They don't know what's there. They don't know what happened. There's a victim of the crash laying on the cockpit floor dead, and so I try to bring out setting elements that will allow me to make that impression. Now, when they bring it back to the cockpit, they have, I want it to feel simulator-like and made up, because it is simulator-like and made up, but it's all the same things in all the same places. So I focus on the few things that are different in order to make a different impression. So at the first site, I focus on the dead body. I focus on when they look out the cockpit window, they see the moonscape out there with all the littered debris right where it landed. On their comms, they hear the voices of the evidence techs, cataloging and bagging up all the evidence, the bits and pieces. When I move it back to the hangar bay and I want it to feel simulator-like, I focus on the things that are different. There's no body there. I make a point of saying that they've got a spacesuit there to represent the body. They look out the hangar door, they don't see the moon, they look out the cockpit, they see the corrugated hangar door. And instead of evidence techs collecting evidence, they hear the hum of the analytic equipment that they moved into the cargo bay to do the simulations. And so I focus on those things that are different that allow me to make a different impression with the same setting. And then you might want to make a different impression with the same setting if you view that setting through the eyes of a different character. So, for example, a homeless person might walk into a middle-class home and find it opulent. Okay, a billionaire business tycoon might walk into the same house and look upon it with disdain. So you can change what they notice or change the way that they interpret what they notice in order to change the impression that you make. See. All right, so that is all work that we've done to describe our setting, but we haven't written a single word of our book yet. So now we're going to get into how to describe this on the page. And so the first thing to consider is when a character first walks into a setting, don't stop the action and describe every nuance of the place. Right? Or better yet, don't stop the action at all. For example, the prologue, the original prologue of this book could have begun like this. The traffic control room was small. It had 2 rows of computer terminals. Behind them sat the traffic controllers, facing a central holographic display that showed the current traffic patterns. 2 federal agents stood behind Director Snyder. The smell of sweat hung in the air. Suddenly, an alarm sounded. So it's not a bad description. It's got, 3 of the 5 senses. The problem is, it's completely static. It's almost like the character is looking at a photograph of the setting. There's absolutely nothing happened. He walks in the room and suddenly he just like pans the space to see what it is. And I describe it to the reader. So try to include the same setting elements as part of the action of the scene. Director Jack Snyder pulled at the collar of his jumpsuit in the sweat-fouled air of the traffic control room. He would have paced the aisle behind the second tier of computer terminals if it wouldn't have betrayed his nervousness. As it was, he felt trapped. The federal agents who stood behind him, looking past his shoulders, made him uneasy, claustrophobic. Something's wrong, Chavez, the controller said. Her voice, edged with tension, carried in the small room. Snyder's heart surged. Trajectory traces crisscrossed the holographic display that dominated the front of the room. The muted voices of the controllers speaking into their comlinks died into silence as the trajectory displayed for the Phoenix turned red and separated from the green line of the ship's assigned flight path. An alarm sounded, reverberating off the walls and ringing in Snyder's brain. So this is not perfect. It's got some tell in it, but it's much better because we actually see the elements as part of the action that's happening. So there's very little that's static in this particular description. So once you've written your scene, go back and look at how you have described it. Go sort of evaluate. How did I do? Check to see that your description is realistic, has to be realistic, has to be memorable, has to be not overly described, and not described all at once. So if it's not all of those things, then revise your description. Go back to your setting card. If you haven't made the impression that you want to make, then change the details that you presented, or change the way that your characters interpret those details to help make the impression you want to make. If you've overly described it, take out some of the details. Let the reader fill in the blanks. And finally, describe it as it's seen by your viewpoint character. So when Chase approaches the crash site of the Phoenix, he has lots of time as he's driving up to it to evaluate what he sees. And so he has lots of reasons and lots of time to look at the details and to evaluate what they tell him about, at least initially, about what might have happened. So when I describe that, you get a lot of detail, and you get some of his interpretation. Chase's view of the Phoenix was a mere glint of sunlight on the horizon. As he drew closer, the fuselage came into view, jutting skyward from the flat terrain like a solitary tombstone in a field of glittering metal. The effect gave a surreal beauty to the desolate scene. The pod came to a stop at the boundary of the debris field. The ship was close now. The fuselage, largely intact, rested at an odd angle at the end of a long scar in the landscape. The debris field stretched out to the northwest, away from Chase's vehicle in the direction of the rover tracks. Dents and cracks that marred the hull suggested that the ship had tumbled into its final resting place. The aft section, the cargo hold, was mangled. So I give lots of detail because he has the time and the inclination to notice them. Now contrast that with this next scene in which the same character is involved in a gunfight in the enemy stronghold. Two terrorists moved before them as they wound their way through the labyrinthine passages. The defenders stopped at each intersection to fire a few odd rounds, which slowed Chase and his party, but the men never stayed in one place for long. Twice the terrorists fired through a window to bring down isolation doors and seal off part of the complex. They're running out of ammo, Mike concluded. No, they're hurting us. So here you don't get any details at all. All you get is just a vague sense of passages and windows and pressure doors. I left out all of the details because Chase neither has the time nor the inclination to notice them. Also, when you choose the language or vocabulary that you use to describe the scene, also consider your character's viewpoint. General Chang reclined in the womb of his stronghold with his feet propped on the conference table. So when I use the word womb, describing it from Chang's viewpoint, what does that tell you about how Chang feels in this place? Safe. Safe? What else? Comfortable? Like it's home? Maybe warm. We don't know that, but maybe. So if I were to describe this from Chase's viewpoint, as Chase is brought there as a prisoner, fully expecting that he will be murdered there, am I going to use the word womb? No. So Chase is brought downstairs. It's underground. And so here's how I describe it when he walks in. Chase stepped into the bunker. From Chase's point of view, this is an awful lot like a bunker down here. It's underground. It's got concrete walls. I don't know if I'm going to make it out of here. And so consider your character's viewpoint when you describe your setting. And so this actually touches on something that warrants a little bit more discussion. When I'm teaching my revising fiction class, one of the phrases that I repeat more than any other is run home to character viewpoint. Almost every decision that you make in your writing should be driven by a consideration for character viewpoint. What impression do I want to make? Run home to character viewpoint. How does your character view it? What impression does he have or she have? And why? When you're thinking about how many details to include, run home to character viewpoint. Which details do I include? Run home to character viewpoint. What vocabulary do I use to describe those details? Run home to character viewpoint. So these are just examples from setting, but everything in your writing should be driven by your character's viewpoint, because ultimately your story is not about the events. It is about what your character is experiencing as a result of the events. Specificity. When you describe your settings in your world, fill it with specific, concrete details, not vague references. So, for example, Chase would have to start packing soon. Maybe tomorrow he'd crate up his belongings. Does the word belongings invoke an image or an emotion? Does it reveal anything about the character or the world he lives in? Does it bring the setting or the character or the story to life? No, none of those things. Why? Because it's not specific. Watch what happens if I replace belongings with a few specific details. He'd have to start packing soon. Maybe tomorrow he'd crate up the non-essentials, his drawing table, most of his clothes, even that ridiculous hologram that Aaron sent him last year, the one that misrepresented Pluto's orbit. Eventually everything would go, except for the framed Dimitri on the far wall. Painted to make use of the base's high-ceilinged lunar architecture, it was too big to take back to Earth. Besides, he'd have little need for an earthly landscape of the Olympic range when he could look upon it with his own eyes. Okay? So whenever you're describing a space that is specific to a character, whether it's their home, whether it's their bedroom, whether it's the contents of their purse or wallet, it's okay to throw in a few common things, but focus on the things that are unique to your character. Focus on the things that say something to the reader about your character. So these are very specifically chosen details. So the image of the painting, for example, if I just said it's a painting, you can't see it. But when I describe the image and give the name of the author, it becomes a real thing. And this particular painting is too big to take back to Earth because it was painted to make use of the base's high-ceiling lunar architecture. So this is an opportunity for me to show how my setting on the moon is different from the readers here and now. It's got high ceilings. Why would lunar architecture have high ceilings? What do you think? Low gravity, low gravity. Okay, I never say that, but it's there for the reader who wants to consider it. So the hologram is a merchandising trinket. He describes it as ridiculous, that ridiculous hologram that misrepresents Pluto's orbit, yet he's going to pack it up and he's going to take it home. What does that tell you? No, it was that ridiculous hologram that Aaron gave him last year. We don't know who Aaron is, but we now know that Aaron is important to him, right? We learn later that she's actually his daughter. So and the fact that this merchandising trinket is a hologram, so that's an advancement of technology. So again, the setting is different than the readers here and now. So it has misrepresents Pluto's orbit. Pluto has an odd orbit. It does, and so that's a believable mistake. But it suggests that Chase is in a position to know what Pluto's orbit is. We learn later that he was actually on the first manned mission to Pluto. So there's a lot going on in the selection of that one specific detail. What else? I'm going to skip a couple here just in the interest of time. Comparisons. Don't neglect comparisons. So I have a particular scene where I'm trying to describe my characters running on the moon. So people run differently on the moon than they do here. So this is a great opportunity for me to show how the setting is different from the readers here and now. You want to do that in every single scene if you can. So I'm sitting here trying to, scratch my head and picture this and try and describe it. And I could have done it this way. The four of them made a dash for the building. They ran side by side in the moon's gravity. They rose slowly with each stride and returned to the ground just as slowly, only to bounce again and again until they reached their destination. So you can probably picture that. The problem is that I've used so many words to say it that by the time the reader is done with the paragraph, they don't care about the image anymore. They just want to get on with the story. But if I pull in a comparison of something that's familiar to the reader to describe that, I might say the four of them made a dash for the building, bounding up and down in a ragged line like so many horses on a merry-go-round. See, to me, that's a clearer image, much more briefly spoken. So don't neglect the opportunities to pull in comparisons. And I said here, they made a mad dash for the building. Anybody can see the building? Anybody know what the building looks like? No? In an earlier scene, I had described the building this way. The habitation dome was maybe 100 meters in diameter with a semi-cylindrical protrusion of the equipment garage on one side, the only obvious entrance to the structure. Can you picture it? What if I add the sentence, from afar, it looked like a giant igloo on a vast stretch of dirty ice. Now you can see the building. Now you can see the building. The comparison makes the image. And then in the running scene, I brought their mind back to this image by replacing the word building with igloo. The four of them made a dash for the building, or for the igloo, bounding up and down like so many horses on a merry-go-round. All right. And finally, adjectives. Adjectives. Don't stack up too many adjectives in front of a single noun. So if I were to write, for example, it was a hot, dry, sunny summer day, that is an awful lot of information for my reader to catalog in their mind about this particular day. And so it's not too onerous if you only do it every once in a while. I don't recommend that. But a lot of authors that do this, they write it, they do it for everything. They do it for everything. And suddenly they've got 4 or 5, 3, 4, 5 adjectives for every noun. And it just gets impossible. So the question then is, I want to cut that down to 1. But which one should I pick? Hot, dry, sunny, summer day. Which one should I pick? Do you know? Run home to character viewpoint. If I have a construction worker tarring a roof at noon, which one do I use? It is hot. If I have a farmer worried about another year of drought, it's dry. If I have a school-age kids with a couple of weeks left till classes start again, it's summer. Okay. If your viewpoint character does not, have a viewpoint that is, that gives you a specific or a clear answer to this question, then pick the one that best implies the rest. Because if it's not important enough to your viewpoint character to suggest which one you ought to keep, it probably doesn't matter. So, all right. So that's what I have. What questions you got?